I'm a 24-year-old woman, and this is the story of how I found out I was adopted. It all started when I turned 18. I had just finished high school and was looking forward to starting college. My adoptive parents had promised me that we'd have a special family dinner to celebrate, but when I got home that evening, I wasn't prepared for what they were about to tell me. We sat around the dinner table, the three of us, me, my mom, and my dad. They looked serious, almost nervous, which was weird because they usually tried to keep things light. My dad took a deep breath, and without much of a lead-up, he just said it: I was adopted. It felt like the floor had disappeared under me. For 18 years, I believed they were my biological parents, and then suddenly they weren't. They explained that they had adopted me when I was just a baby, and that they had always planned to tell me, but somehow, the right time never came. I didn't know what to say. It's not like there's a handbook on how to react when your whole life turns upside down in a matter of minutes. I just remember nodding, my mind spinning. Questions swirled through my head. Why did they wait so long? Or who were my real parents? Did they not want me anymore? But I couldn't even get those words out. I just sat there, numb, listening as they talked about how much they loved me. I wanted to believe them, but it felt like they had hidden a huge part of my life from me. And the worst part? My sister, who I'd always thought was my full sibling, wasn't really my sister at all. My non-biological sister, I'll call her Julia, is 2 years older than me. And looking back, it all made sense. Growing up, she was always the golden child. My parents doted on her, gave her everything she wanted, and were always talking about how smart and talented she was. They'd save up for her art classes, buy her the latest gadgets, and throw her big birthday parties. Meanwhile, I got whatever was left over. I didn't think too much about it back then. Some kids just get more attention, right? But after the adoption reveal, I started to see it in a different light. It's not like I was neglected or anything, but I never felt like I could live up to what Julia had. If I got a B on a test, my parents would give me a lecture about trying harder. But if Julia got a B, they'd talk about how hard she'd worked and how proud they were of her effort. If I made a mistake, like breaking a dish or being late for curfew, the punishment would be harsh, grounded for a week, no phone, the works. But when Julia messed up, they'd brush it off as a minor mistake. There was always this unspoken rule that I was the one who had to be better, that I had to prove I belonged in the family. Still, I tried to push those feelings aside and focus on my future. I took up a job at a local cafe, planning to save up for college. My parents didn't have much to give me for tuition, which was understandable. I never expected a free ride. But just as I was getting ready to move forward, everything changed again. It was around the end of that summer when my parents died in a car accident. One moment, I was worrying about textbooks and student loans, and the next I was standing at their funeral, trying to wrap my head around the fact that they were gone. Julia was there, of course, but she was distant, like she'd already moved on. She talked more about managing the estate and dealing with the paperwork than about our parents. A few weeks later, we had the will reading. I didn't expect much, maybe a little bit of help with my college fees or something small to remember them by. But what I found out left me reeling. They had left everything. The house, their savings, everything, to Julia. I got nothing. No explanation, no keepsake, just a vague apology from the lawyer about how these things sometimes go. I confronted Julia right after, demanding to know why they would do this. She shrugged, saying it was their decision and that I shouldn't expect anything just because I was brought into the family. Her words stung. Brought into the family like I was an outsider all along. She made it clear that she didn't owe me anything, and I realized that she saw me as just that, not her sister, but some girl her parents had taken in. Things went downhill fast after that. We both lived in the house for a while, but every conversation turned into a fight. I begged her to give me time to save up for a place of my own, to let me get through the first semester of college, but she wanted me out. She said the house was hers, and she didn't want me freeloading anymore. It didn't matter that I had nowhere to go, or that I was still grieving our parents. One evening, I came back from a shift at the cafe to find the locks changed. I pounded on the door, but she called the police on me, saying I was trespassing. They escorted me off the property like I was a stranger. Just like that, I was homeless. I didn't even have time to grab my things. So there I was, sitting on the curb outside what used to be my home, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a few dollars in my pocket. I had no family to turn to, no friends who could take me in, and no idea where I'd sleep that night. All I could think was how fast my life had fallen apart, from finding out I was adopted, to losing my parents, to being pushed out onto the streets by the only sister I'd ever known. It's strange how you think you know the people closest to you, and then you find out you never really knew them at all. Update 1. Curring. After being kicked out, my first weeks on the streets were a blur. I slept in shelters when there was space, but most nights it was just me and the cold concrete. I couldn't afford to think too far ahead. I was focused on finding my next meal, a safe place to sleep. My job at the cafe was gone. You can't exactly keep a shift when you don't have a place to shower or store your uniform. I thought about going to college, but that felt like a fantasy. So I did what I had to do. I found work at a local diner washing dishes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to get me off the streets and into a cheap rooming house. It was just a tiny room with a bed and a shared bathroom down the hall, but it was better than the shelter. I picked up extra shifts at a nearby grocery store, stocking shelves late into the night. Between the diner and the grocery store, I was clocking in close to 60 hours a week, barely scraping by, but at least I had a roof over my head. It took a few months, but eventually I managed to save enough to move into a small studio apartment. It wasn't much, just a bed, a small table, and a window that barely let in any light. But it was mine, and I could lock the door and feel safe. I remember the first night I slept there, I just lay on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how far I'd come from those nights on the street. It wasn't some grand victory, but it felt like a tiny step forward. One day, while running an errand, I bumped into an old friend from high school. We weren't super close back then, but she knew me and Julia. She was shocked to see me working at the diner and living in such a rough neighborhood. We caught up over lunch, and she listened as I told her everything that had happened. The adoption reveal, my parents' accident, Julia kicking me out, everything. She couldn't believe how things had turned out. Then, she dropped a piece of gossip that hit me hard. Julia was apparently living it up, driving around in a brand new sports car, showing off her expensive vacations on social media. It stunned to hear that while I was scraping together rent money, she was out there living her best life on the inheritance that should have been shared. But I kept my mouth shut and focused on my next steps. There was no point in dwelling on things I couldn't change. Work at the diner wasn't easy. The kitchen was hot, the shifts long, and some of my coworkers didn't like that I was willing to pick up extra shifts. One of them, a guy who'd been there for years, tried to make things difficult. He started spreading rumors about me to the manager, trying to make me look bad. But the manager knew how hard I was working. He'd seen me show up on time, never complain. Even when I had to clean up the messes no one else wanted to deal with. In the end, he sided with me, and the coworker backed off. But it was a reminder that life wasn't going to give me any breaks. Around this time, I found a low-cost therapy program through a local charity. It wasn't much, just group sessions with other people going through tough times, but it helped me process everything that had happened. I started to understand how much my childhood had shaped me, how being the second choice in my family had left scars I hadn't even realized were there. It didn't make things magically better, but it helped me make sense of why I felt the way I did. I started making a few friends at the diner and through the therapy group, just a small circle of people who understood what it was like to struggle. We'd hang out after work sometimes, grabbing cheap takeout and talking about our days. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel completely alone. It was a strange feeling, but a good one. As the months went on, I fell into a steady routine. I worked my shifts, paid my bills, and even started saving a little bit each month, just a few dollars here and there, but it added up. It was enough to build a small emergency fund. It made me feel a bit more secure, like I wouldn't be completely helpless if something went wrong again. After a year of grinding, I finally managed to pay off some of the debt I'd accumulated during those rough months. That gave me a little breathing room, and I started thinking about my future again. College was still out of reach, but I found some affordable online courses that could help me get a better job. It wasn't much, but it felt like a way to build a future for myself, even if it was going to be a slow climb. At the diner, I got closer to a guy named Daniel. He had a story a lot like mine, rough childhood, few opportunities. We started hanging out after work, talking about our pasts, our dreams, all the things we hoped for but didn't think we'd ever have. One thing led to another, and we started dating. It felt good to have someone in my corner, someone who understood what it was like to struggle but still keep going. Daniel helped me study for my online courses. He'd quiz me after shifts, help me go over practice tests, and keep me motivated on the days when I just wanted to give up. It wasn't easy, but with his support, I finished a few of those courses and landed a better paying job at a small office. It wasn't glamorous, mostly data entry, but it paid more than the diner, and it was a step up. With a new job, I finally felt like I was getting somewhere. I could pay my rent without worrying about making it to the next paycheck, and I even started saving for something more, maybe a nicer apartment, or maybe a dead fit, maybe even going back to school full-time someday. It was slow progress, but it was real. I ended up writing a post about it on Reddit, sharing how I'd gone from being homeless to finally having some stability. I wrote about the kindness of strangers, the people who helped me when I was at my lowest, and how it's possible to rebuild, even when everything seems lost. The post got more attention than I expected, comments from people saying they were rooting for me, that they'd been through something similar, and that my story gave them hope. Reading those comments made me realize that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, I was actually on the path to something better. Update 2. With my new office job, things started to change quickly. It wasn't a fancy role, mostly data entry and filing, but it came with regular hours, a steady paycheck, and a break from the physical strain of restaurant work. It was a different kind of challenge. I had to get used to sitting at a desk for hours, managing spreadsheets and following office protocols, but I adapted. My boss noticed, and after a few months, she started giving me more responsibilities. I handled small projects, took on training for new hires, and gradually became a key part of the team. She even hinted that a promotion could be in my future if I kept it up. Daniel was with me every step of the way. He helped me adjust to the new environment, reminding me that I had already overcome tougher things. On weekends, we'd go over my work assignments together, and he'd share tips he'd picked up from his own experiences in retail. With his support, I started feeling more confident at work, like I was finally building something stable. Our relationship grew stronger, and I found myself leaning on him more, trusting that he'd always have my back. One afternoon, I ran into my old diner manager while shopping for groceries. He spotted me as I reached for a box of cereal and came over with a big smile. He couldn't believe how much my situation had changed since I left the diner. But we talked for a while, catching up on life. He told me how proud he was to see me doing better and reminded me that I'd always been a hard worker, even when times were tough. It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. It was one of those reminders that even the rough parts of life had helped shape where I was now. Not long after that, I got a message from an old contact, someone who'd been around during my rougher days on the streets. They reached out to let me know that the stranger who had scammed me out of my GoFundMe money had been caught in a separate scam. I had the option to press charges to get some closure on that part of my life, but after thinking about it, I decided to let it go. I didn't need to open that wound again. It wasn't worth my energy. I'd moved past that chapter, and I wanted to keep looking forward. As things settled into a new rhythm, Daniel started talking more about our future together. One weekend, he suggested we go for a hike in a nearby park. It was a beautiful day, with the sun filtering through the trees and a cool breeze. We reached a quiet spot overlooking a small valley, and that's when Daniel got down on one knee. He pulled out a simple silver ring and asked me to marry him. I couldn't believe it. A year ago, I was struggling just to survive, And now this wonderful, kind man was asking me to build a life with him. I said yes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe things were finally going to be okay. We planned a small wedding, nothing fancy, just a few close friends and some of my new colleagues. It felt surreal, picking out a dress, looking at flowers, talking about a future with someone who genuinely cared about me. On our wedding day, I remember standing in front of Daniel and feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known before. We exchanged vows, promising to support each other no Daniel or what, and I realized that I'd found the kind of love and stability I'd never thought I deserved. After the wedding, Daniel surprised me with a honeymoon trip to a nearby beach town. It wasn't a 5-star resort or anything like that, just a cozy little cabin by the water, but it was perfect. We spent our days walking along the shore, talking about our dreams and plans, and just enjoying the peace of being together. It wasn't about money or luxury, it was about the fact that we'd both come so far, and we had each other. When we got back, things at work continued to look up. About a month later, my boss called me into her office and offered me a promotion. It came with a better salary and more responsibilities. I'd be overseeing a small team and managing some client accounts. It felt like all the hard work was finally paying off. For the first time, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, and I could start thinking about long-term plans, saving up, maybe even buying a small car to make commuting easier. With the promotion, I reconnected with a few old friends from high school. We ran into each other at a community event, and they were surprised to see how much my life had changed. They admitted that they'd heard about my struggles but didn't know how to reach out or if I'd even want to hear from them. It was a little awkward, but it felt good to show them that I'd turned things around. It wasn't about proving something to them, it was about recognizing how far I'd come. A year into our marriage, Daniel and I decided it was time to start trying for a baby. We talked about it for weeks, weighing the pros and cons, making sure we were both ready for the changes it would bring. It wasn't a decision we took lightly, but we both knew how much family meant to us, especially after everything we'd been through. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. When the test came back positive, I called Daniel immediately, and we couldn't stop laughing and crying. It felt like everything was falling into place. We told our friends and my coworkers, and they surprised me with a small baby shower in the break room. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was filled with love, and it made me realize just how many people were rooting for us. I wrote another update on Reddit, sharing the news about the pregnancy and reflecting on how I'd gone from being homeless to expecting my first child. The post blew up, and people from all over commented, sharing their congratulations and telling me how much my story meant to them. I never thought I'd become one of those inspirational posts, but reading through those comments, I felt like I'd finally made it to the other side of everything. Then, just when I thought life couldn't surprise me anymore, there was a knock on our apartment door one evening. I opened it to find my non-biological sister standing there. She looked nothing like the Julia I remembered. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were worn, and she had this desperate look in her eyes. She had lost everything, her lavish lifestyle, the money, everything. She asked if she could come inside, explaining that she was facing eviction and had nowhere else to go. It was like my past had come knocking, forcing me to face everything I thought I'd left behind. Update 3. When I opened the door and saw Julia standing there, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who used to flaunt designer bags and perfectly styled hair looked worn down, with unkempt hair and clothes that had seen better days. For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure if this was real. Then she started talking fast, explaining how she'd lost everything: bad investments, overspending, no savings. Now she was facing eviction with nowhere else to turn. I stood there, frozen, as memories of being kicked out of our parents' home flooded back. How she'd changed the locks on me, how she watched while the police escorted me out. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but she looked so desperate. Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat down in the living room, Daniel's wary eyes tracking our every move from the kitchen. She spilled her story, and it wasn't pretty. Julia had blown through the entire inheritance in a few years, living like the money would never run out. A new car, trips to Europe, fancy dinners, it all drained her bank account faster than she thought possible. When the funds dried up, so did her social circle. She hadn't managed to hold down a job, and now, debt collectors were breathing down her neck. For the first time, she apologized. She admitted that she had been selfish, that she knew she had treated me terribly. She said she regretted how she'd pushed me out of the family home when I was vulnerable. Her voice cracked as she told me she wished she could take it back. It was the kind of apology I never thought I'd hear, but it felt too little, too late. Daniel pulled me aside after Julia left. He didn't trust her sudden change of heart. He reminded me how cruel she'd been, how she'd left me to fend for myself when I had nowhere else to go. He thought her apology might be driven by desperation, not real remorse. But he also said that he would stand by me, whatever I decided to do. It was clear he was worried, though. He didn't want me to get sucked back into a toxic relationship. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself standing outside that locked house, clutching a trash bag of clothes. I remembered the nights on the streets, the hunger, the fear of not knowing where I'd sleep. It was hard to see Julia as anything other than the person who put me through all that. But I also remembered how lost she'd looked on my doorstep, and I wondered if turning her away would make me just as heartless. I turned to Reddit for advice. I poured out everything in a post, how Julia had shown up out of nowhere, her apology, her desperation, and my fear that helping her would mean betraying myself. The comments flooded in. Some people told me that I should let her suffer the consequences of her actions, that she had made her bed and now she had to lie in it. Others said I might find peace if I helped her, that holding on to resentment would only hurt me in the long run. It was all so divided that it left me even more conflicted than before. The next day, I sat down with Julia again. I told her about the nights I spent on the streets, about how I barely made it through those first months, how her actions had nearly broken me. Her face crumpled as I spoke. She broke down, crying, insisting that she was a different person now. She said that losing everything had shown her how wrong she was, that she'd taken everything for granted. She admitted that she'd always been jealous of me, jealous of my strength, of how I managed to keep going even when life knocked me down. It was the first time she had ever spoken to me like that, like she saw me as a person, not just the shadow of her perfect life. She laid out her financial situation, and it was a mess. Credit card debt, unpaid rent, barely any food in her fridge. She tried to find work but had been turned down over and over. I could see she was in a bad place, but I still wasn't sure how much I could trust her. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, knowing she was facing the same kind of desperation I had once felt, but I also couldn't ignore the genuine fear in her eyes. After a lot of thinking, I decided to give her a little help. I offered her a small sum of money, enough to cover a month's rent at a cheap place and a few groceries, but I made it clear this was a one-time deal. I told her this wasn't about mending our relationship or pretending the past didn't happen. It was just about giving her a chance to get back on her feet. I laid down strict boundaries, no more money, no more favors. She nodded, agreeing to everything. It felt like a fragile truce. Daniel wasn't thrilled. He worried that once we opened the door, she'd keep coming back, that her situation might become a burden on us, especially with the baby on the way. But he trusted my judgment, and I assured him that I would hold firm on the boundaries I'd set. I updated Reddit, sharing my decision and the conditions I'd put in place. The responses were all over the place again. Some people thought I was being too soft. Others said I'd done the right thing. A few even warned me to keep an eye on her, predicting that she'd try to push those boundaries eventually. I tried not to let it get to me, but the doubts lingered. Over the next few weeks, Julia surprised me. She started applying for jobs again, going to interviews, and even found a part-time gig at a small retail store. She texted me updates, small things like how her first paycheck went straight to covering her overdue bills. She even thanked me, which was something I never thought I'd hear from her. It didn't make up for the past, but it felt like maybe, just maybe, she was trying. Still, I kept my guard up. I didn't invite her over, didn't involve her in my life beyond the small support I'd offered. It was hard to balance everything, preparing for the baby, managing work, and keeping an eye on whether Julia would slip back into old habits. Some days I felt like I was carrying too many weights, unsure which one might drop first. But for now, I was just taking things one day at a time, hoping I hadn't made a mistake by opening that door again. Update 4. Julia kept trying after our last conversation, but it wasn't easy for her. She found a few jobs here and there, mostly retail and customer service, but nothing seemed to stick. One job let her go after only a month because she couldn't keep up with the hours. Another place shut down unexpectedly, leaving her stranded without a paycheck. She would text me sometimes, asking for advice on how to handle interviews or what to do about difficult managers. But to her credit, she never asked me for more money. Our talks stayed businesslike, never venturing into emotional territory. It was clear we both had our guard up. Then my pregnancy started getting complicated. I was about 7 months in when the doctor told me I needed to take it easy. Too much stress and physical strain were putting me at risk. It meant bed rest, no more long walks, no more doing things around the house. Daniel took on more hours at work to cover the bills and take care of me. He never complained, but I could see the exhaustion in his face when he came home each night. We managed, but it was tough knowing I couldn't contribute much. During those weeks, Julia did something that caught me off guard. One afternoon, a package showed up at our door, homemade meals, neatly packed in containers. There wasn't a note or anything, but I knew they were from her. The food kept coming every few days, simple things like soup, pasta, and casseroles. Daniel and I appreciated the help. It was the last thing I expected from her, and it made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was trying to be a better person. When our daughter was born, it felt like a new chapter. Holding that tiny baby in my arms, I couldn't believe that something so pure and beautiful had come into my life after everything I'd been through. Daniel and I named her Nora, hoping she'd have a life filled with the love and stability I'd always dreamed of. We spent the first few days in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and trying to get whatever sleep we could. Not long after, Julia asked if she could visit. I hesitated but eventually agreed. She came by with a small stuffed bear, standing awkwardly at the doorway before I invited her in. The meeting was tense, and we exchanged only a few words, but when she saw Nora, I saw something soften in her. She looked at my daughter with a kind of regretful smile, like she wished she could have been part of this sooner. I didn't push her for explanations. I just let her have that moment. After she left, I found myself going back to my old Reddit posts, reading through the advice I'd received. Some people had encouraged me to forgive for my own peace of mind, while others had warned that Julia might never truly change. Now that I had Nora, I couldn't help but think about the kind of example I wanted to set. I didn't want to hold on to the bitterness, but I also didn't want to let my guard down too much. It was a balancing act, and I wasn't sure where to land. Then things took another turn. Julia's situation got even worse. She lost her job again, and her landlord decided to sell the building. She tried to keep up with rent while looking for work, but it didn't last. One rainy evening, she showed up at our doorstep, her clothes soaked through, holding a small duffel bag. She had nowhere else to go. She promised that it would be temporary, that she'd find a job and a place soon, but right now she was desperate. Daniel was reluctant. He pointed out that we had a newborn to think about and that our home needed to be a stable environment. But after a long conversation, he agreed to let her stay, on strict conditions. I told Julia she had a month to get back on her feet. No extensions, no more handouts. She had to contribute to the household and respect our space. She nodded, accepting the terms without argument. The first few days were tense. Julia helped with chores around the house, cleaning up after meals and folding laundry. She mostly kept to herself, avoiding any unnecessary interaction with Daniel and me. It wasn't perfect, but at least she seemed to be trying. And with Nora in the house, it was hard not to let some of the tension melt away, even if just a little. Over time, Julia and I started having quiet conversations late at night when Nora was asleep and Daniel was winding down after his shifts. It started with small things, like memories of our childhood, or what she was planning to do after finding a new job. She told me about the pressure she always felt to be perfect, how our parents had expected so much from her. She confessed that she never thought I'd be the one to survive everything that happened. I listened, and for the first time I saw her not just as the sister who'd hurt me, but as someone struggling with her own demons. I shared some of my own memories, how I always felt like I wasn't enough, how it hurt to be compared to her all the time. We didn't solve anything, but it felt like we were finally seeing each other for who we were, not just the roles we'd been stuck in. As the weeks went by, I realized that I was starting to see Julia differently. She wasn't just the golden child who had cast me aside. She was someone who had fallen hard, just like I had, and was trying to claw her way back up. It didn't erase the past, but it helped me understand that we'd both been shaped by the same struggles, just in different ways. Daniel was still cautious. He reminded me that our priority was Nora and that we couldn't let the past drag us down again. But even he softened a bit when he saw Julia reading to Nora one night, her voice gentle and full of the same longing I sometimes felt. It was a fragile piece, but it was there. As the end of Julia's month-long stay approached, I found myself wondering if maybe there was a way forward for both of us. Not a perfect ending, but maybe something that wasn't as broken as before. Update 5. The first few days after Julia moved in were tense. She kept to her small corner of our home, barely speaking except when necessary. Daniel kept a close eye on her, his unease clear whenever he glanced her way. I could tell he was struggling with the new dynamic, and I didn't blame him. Our routines had changed overnight, and suddenly the house felt too small for the three of us, and a newborn. I spent most of my time with Nora, trying to keep things as normal as possible for her. Julia threw herself into job hunting, applying for everything she could find. But the market wasn't kind. She went to interviews and came back looking more deflated each time. I recognized the frustration in her expression. It was the same look I'd worn for months when no one would give me a chance. But I kept my distance, letting her deal with it on her own terms. After all, she was the one who needed to prove she could get back on her feet. One evening, Daniel had to work late, and it was just me and Julia at home. After Nora fell asleep, I made some tea and sat down at the kitchen table, trying to unwind. Julia joined me, her face lined with exhaustion. We started talking, slowly at first, but then the conversation drifted into deeper waters. She admitted that she used to envy me, my independence, the way I seemed to keep going no Daniel or what. She told me that even when she had everything, she felt like something was missing. She said she had resented me because she couldn't understand why I didn't need their approval as much as she did. I hadn't planned to open up, but her words brought back memories I'd kept buried. I found myself talking about the nights I spent on the streets, the days I went without eating, the moments when I felt completely invisible. I told her things I'd never even told Daniel. There were tears, hers and mine, and by the time we finished, it felt like a heavy weight had lifted, even if just a little. The next morning, things seemed lighter between us. Julia apologized again, but this time it felt different, less like a desperate plea and more like she really understood the damage she'd caused. I found myself softening, realizing that maybe we were both just two people who'd been broken in different ways. But the peace didn't last long. The month I'd given Julia to stay came and went, and still, she struggled to find a steady job. Daniel grew increasingly frustrated, pointing out that we were starting to dip into our savings. He worried that Julia was taking advantage of our help, even if she didn't mean to. I tried to reassure him, but I could feel the pressure building between us. It was hard, balancing my loyalty to my sister and my responsibility to my new family. To her credit, Julia tried to show she was serious about getting back on track. She took over most of the cooking and helped clean the house. She even fixed a few things that had been broken for ages, like the leaky kitchen faucet. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it helped ease some of the tension in the house. Then finally, a break came through. Julia landed a job as a cashier at a local store. It wasn't much, but it was something steady. I felt a mix of relief and pride watching her go to her first shift, her shoulders squared with determination. It wasn't going to solve everything, but it was a step forward, and she seemed eager to make it work. As the weeks went by, we found moments of genuine connection. We'd sit on the porch after Nora fell asleep, talking about our parents and the expectations they'd placed on us. For the first time, I saw Julia as more than just the sister who had hurt me. She was someone who had her own struggles, her own regrets. We weren't magically close, but we were starting to find some kind of middle ground. Daniel, though, remained skeptical. He reminded me that our priority had to be Nora, that we couldn't let Julia's problems become ours again. He wasn't wrong. I knew we needed to think about saving for our daughter's future, especially with the cost of raising a child. I found myself caught between wanting to protect my family and feeling a growing empathy for Julia's situation. Eventually, I sat down with Julia and told her that she had 3 more weeks to find her own place. I made it clear that this wasn't about pushing her away, but about making sure we all had the space to move forward. Julia listened quietly, her expression hard to read, but she nodded and thanked me for giving her the time she'd had. But just when I thought things were moving in the right direction, Julia had a setback. She missed a shift at work and spent one night out drinking, coming back smelling like alcohol. I confronted her the next morning, laying out the boundaries we'd agreed upon. Julia looked ashamed, tears in her eyes as she promised to do better. She told me she was afraid of ending up alone again, that she didn't want to lose the only family she had left. It was hard not to feel some of that old anger bubbling up, but I also knew she was struggling to change. Daniel and I talked it over, and we decided to give her one last bit of help. We offered to cover the first month's rent if she could secure a lease on a small apartment nearby. But we made it clear this was the last time we'd be able to offer financial support. After this, she was on her own. She agreed, and a few days later, she found a place, a modest, one-bedroom apartment a couple of towns over. On moving day, we packed up her few belongings into the back of our car and drove her over. She thanked us quietly, her voice choked with emotion. As I helped her unpack, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that she was taking this step on her own, but sadness that things had turned out this way between us. When we left, she stood on the front steps of her new place, waving as we drove away. I updated Reddit one last time, sharing the complicated feelings I had about the whole situation. I wrote about how hard it had been to navigate between helping my sister and protecting my own family, but that I believed I'd made the right choice. The responses were kinder this time, with people acknowledging the complexity of the situation and the strength it took to set boundaries. I don't know what the future holds for Julia and me, but for the first time, I feel like we're both on paths that could lead somewhere better. It's not a perfect ending, but maybe it doesn't have to be.